Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear landscapers? We'll do our best. So welcome to this. My name is Meg. I'm from New Jersey in the USA. And I just want to say that if you're here because you're looking for some information on how to prepare for a miscarriage that you have found out you're going to have, I just want to send my love to you and to say that I'm sorry. And I know what you're going through right now, having just gone through it myself, still kind of going through it. And there's just no words right now. So I'm hoping that by sharing this story, it can bring some sense of preparation and comfort to you in this time that just feels totally out of control. I'm going to talk about some things that I have learned during this process, because the thing that helped me most really were other women that shared their stories with me, and they were so generous, just didn't hold anything back, and that really helped keep me from feeling isolated. And it's really important to me now that other women who might be going through this also don't feel isolated, because you are not alone, and you also need to know that you did absolutely nothing to cause this. There's nothing that any of us did that you might try to run through reasons in your head. Most times with miscarriages, there's just nothing. There's no explanation, and all we can do is try to be kind to ourselves and prepare to move forward from here. I will talk in some pretty specific detail, not because I'm trying to be gross or make you feel any kind of way, other than prepared for things that may happen. And I say may happen because this is just going to be a lot of it my experience, or it may pass on some details that other women have told me. There are no two experiences that are alike, I have found. So take from this what you can. So some things I learned. I have like 10 things that I was going to highlight on here. Number one, there is no right or wrong way to do this. I decided to, when I found out, I was 12 weeks, I had gone to an ultrasound. We were following up on an ultrasound that looked a little not great. And while the baby looked okay, it looked actually really good at the last ultrasound, there were some other things that were kind of red flags. And sure enough, when we went back at 12 weeks, we found out that there was no heartbeat, and there was no movement, and my body was going to miscarry. So obviously it was devastating, and we spent a lot of time that day, crying and, telling people we were hoping to tell that we were expecting that we were miscarrying. So I decided at that point that I was going to attempt to miscarry at home. Nothing, not to say that there's anything wrong with scheduling a procedure. Some women choose to schedule a procedure right away to have the contents from the pregnancy removed. I attempted to miscarry at home. For us, it's always kind of a thing that if our body can do something, we just try, give it a chance to see if it will do that thing. Also, for us, having remains to bury was important, and you can hear the music from the car. I knew that would be easier to deal with at home. So I just was going to give it some time. Also, there's some risk involved with the D&E. It's generally a very safe procedure, one that I ended up almost having, as I'll talk about. But, there's risks with any type of medical situation, intervention. So I just was going to give it some time and see what happened. What I was hoping would happen was that it would get itself over with during the 7 hours a day that my daughter's at school, or the 10 hours at night that she's asleep. Also didn't happen, but it worked out okay. So I waited. I had found out on a Monday, and I waited and I waited and I waited, and nothing was happening. And by Thursday of that week, which was last week actually, I started to change my mind. Mentally, the waiting was getting really, really hard, and I just wanted to have an end date in mind. I was hoping to get it done by the weekend so that I could just have the weekend to rest and maybe go back to work the next Monday. But it didn't happen. So on Thursday, I was like, I'm going to schedule it for Friday. And I scheduled an appointment for Friday, only to find out it was just a consult, because at least here where I am, you do a consult appointment and you talk about it and you sign some papers and then they schedule you. So whatever. I went for the appointment on Friday, talked to the doctor there, and I was scheduled for the following Tuesday. So at that point I thought, okay, because I was having some really mixed feelings. Like, part of me was like, I don't want to go in and have to do the whole procedure piece, but also I didn't know if I necessarily wanted to go through delivering at home and dealing with all of that. I didn't know what to expect, so I was just all over the place. But at least I knew at that point that by the next Tuesday I would be done one way or the other. So that was good. Pardon me, I had the notes. So number 2, if you schedule a procedure and you desire to have remains to bury, talk to everyone. Talk to everyone that you encounter at the office, before the office, whatever. Now, if remains are not part of something that's going to help you, they will take some of the tissue for testing after they remove it, and they will dispose of the rest. So you do not have to have any part of that if that is uncomfortable for you. When you first schedule, now if it is, what I've found is when you first schedule and ask about remains, they're going to probably say we don't do that. And the feedback that I got from a woman in my life who did miscarry and did schedule a D&E right away, just for logistical and personal reasons. She said they first said, no, we absolutely don't do that. And then when she went to the facility, because she still had to go, she talked to the nurses and the doctor that was doing the procedure, and they were actually really good and did secure for her a small sample cup of some of the products that remained that they were then able to bury. She had to go back and pick it up, and they buried. The people, they were really good and really understanding about it. And when I did talk to the doctor at my consult, she took me through the whole process. I knew that there weren't going to be anything recognizable. I wasn't really looking for that. But she did say perhaps she could get me something, if that was important to us. So it's not a guarantee. If you end up having to schedule a D&E and remains are important to you and you can't get them, that's not your fault. It's not anything you did wrong. You tried your best. And I'm sorry if that's something that you want to happen and doesn't seem to happen the way you wanted to, but you tried. You really did. Number 3, a small one. Usually you're asleep for a D&E is what I found, at least when I scheduled mine, where I went. They were like, yep, general anesthesia, knock you out. Someone else I talked to about it said she had an option or something where it was like, oh, you can have the procedure while you're awake, or you can do it under general while you're asleep. She was like, I do not want to be awake. So again, personal preference, but like sleeping sounds optimal in this situation. Okay, so that's that. Number 4, if you miscarry at home, a kit can be helpful to have in the bathroom. This is a kit that I made up myself. In those first days and hours that were so hard, through all that, something I knew was that I wanted to be prepared for this to happen at home. I didn't want to be thrown off guard. That's just kind of the person that I am. So I did some online research. I thought about what I preferred, and I assembled the following stuff into like a kit that I put in a little storage bin, like a collapsible thing, and I put it by the toilet, and it just was there until I needed it. So in that I had a small colander, because tissue does come out of you. It can come out in quite a lot or a little bit at a time, but I knew for me I was going to be most comfortable if I was sitting on the toilet when I did that. And I also knew I didn't want to fish in the toilet if there was something noticeable that I wanted to remove. So for me, I went to the dollar store. I found this small colander with a handle on it, which maybe wasn't the style I was going for, but ended up being the best thing, and allowed me to be as comfortable as possible through that process. I had nitrile gloves that I bought a box of those and popped those in there. I had some plastic bags in case I wanted to use them to dispose of things. I ended up not using them. I had paper towels and disinfecting spray in case I wanted to clean anything. That also made it easier when my 6-year-old was like, what is this stuff? To tell her like, oh, just gotta clean. Close that up. So it also can't hurt to have some brown paper lunch bags around in case you need to wrap something up. I don't know, maybe it's not that necessary. I just found it really helpful. Someone's about to walk their dog nearby, so I don't know if they're going to be in the shot or not. Something else that I had prepared right in those early days was a jar. It was a small jar. It was like the little mason jar, and I knew that that was going to be our best bet for putting remains into to bury them. So I actually, on the lid, I had written out the child's name, and I had these little like flowers that I hot glued to it. I also have some of those flowers to do a little project with later on. And I had some pictures, like little prints of family pictures, and a small like rosary that I had made in college. And I had that all together and ready to wrap up with the jar when the time came. It just felt like a nice little way to prepare the remains for burial. So I had that in a plastic bag in the bottom of that kit so that I could grab it when I needed it. So then I had that ready and I was prepared, and then we waited and we waited and we were waiting until it was finally the following Sunday that I miscarried. So you may notice, I noticed over the week, not everybody does, but you may notice your body preparing. For me, that was a lot of pooping that happened. That was the same way my body prepared for the birth of my first daughter. Body just kind of cleans out. And I noticed on Saturday before I delivered, things kind of were softer down there. Just hormones, doing their job, getting ready. It doesn't happen immediately all the time. But I did notice that. Number 6, pain and cramping. There is in all likelihood going to be some pain and cramping involved if you miscarry on your own. Some describe, like leading up to this, I didn't know what to expect, because actually I expected it to be worse probably than it was, because there were some women that described it as contractions, and these are women, some of them had natural labors, and they described it as really intense contractions like labor, and then they pushed something out and it was over. But so I was expecting that sort of regular pain, which in the beginning I had woken up at like 2:30, and I had this sort of like gritty cramp, like a period cramp, but more intense, almost like a scraping feeling. And I started to notice that with some regularity, like coming and going. And then a little while later, I sort of felt a gush of fluid, and then I just felt that way for the next handful of hours. I used to have really, really intense period cramps, and I will say it wasn't as intense as that, although it was incredibly uncomfortable until things finished. And I've had some mild cramping since then, but nothing crazy. So everybody's different. Number 7, sometimes the process is fast and kind of dramatic, and sometimes it is slow. So some women had said they had felt this intense pain, and then they felt like they had to push, and then they, were in the tub or wherever, and they pushed out something. It just felt like someone likened it to like a grapefruit size clod of stuff. So I was like, oh gosh, like that's what I was kind of waiting for, this big crescendo moment. And that didn't happen to me. Things were coming out, tissue was coming out bit by bit for a while. And I was getting confused because I was like, I don't know how am I going to know when I'm done? And I talked to a friend who had 2 miscarriages, and her advice was really helpful. She's like, my first one was really fast. And obvious, and my second one was it was the other way. Her second one was fast, first one was slow. And she said she felt like I did, where like, how am I going to know when this is done? How do I know if that's it? How do I know when it's done? But she said the last bit that she had passed, it was just different. It was really obvious, and that helped me feel better. And it did end up being the same thing that happened to me. I mean, I probably went for about 7 hours, and then at the end of it, when I finally passed the last of it, it was really obvious. So in that same vein, for number 8, depending on a number of factors, which could be how far along, how long it's been since the baby passed versus when you actually deliver it, your body's response, how your body starts to break down tissues, you may have intact fetal remains and you may not. I had friends who said they did have just this wonderfully formed little fetus, which they felt was really, for them, they found it was kind of special. Some said they didn't. They were like, don't expect something if you're expecting something, because you may not actually have anything that's recognizable. I didn't really feel attached to one way or the other. Honestly, it was kind of in the moment. It, like before that, it almost freaked me out a little bit to think about having to see that. But I knew I would, just deal with it when it happened, if it happened. And I was waiting for that because it was like 11 weeks. I figured I'd have something that was a little more formed by then. But it didn't. I just kept passing tissue that morning. It was like 2:30 to about 9:30. And, I would take it. It was kind of like I'm going to get really graphic here. It was like a red sort of jelly-like substance that I passed. And I would kind of look at it. Sometimes I'd put a glove on and just sort of inspect, but it didn't look like anything, and I would just put it in the toilet and dispose of it that way. And then the last one, and I remember because like everyone was home, it was Sunday morning, my daughter was dancing around and my husband was talking to me. He knew what was going on, so he was trying to like get her ready because they were going to go to mass, and then I had set it up for them to go to brunch at my mom's after, and then my daughter had a birthday party, so like they were going to be out of the house for the day, which is just what I want. I was like, everybody just leave so I can have some space. And literally, like, I said, all right, love you guys, I gotta go to the bathroom. And I went to the bathroom, and as they were walking out the door, I passed the last of it. And it was more tissue than I had passed before that. And like immediately when it happened, that grittiness of my cramping, like let up a little bit. I still had some rough cramps, but it wasn't anything like it had been before I passed that. And I looked at it, and there was something different about it. And at that moment, it was like suddenly really difficult for me to explore that further. I poured a little bit of like distilled water over, but I was just like, no, I can't. I knew that was what I had been waiting to pass. So I put that into the jar that I had. I added a little bit of water with some saline. Honestly, I had saline packets from like nasal rinses. I added a little bit of that because I know that saline can help to preserve things a little bit longer while you're trying to figure out what to do next. If you have a more intact fetal remains, you can also sometimes put that into saline, and you'll have if you want to spend some extra time observing, kind of looking at what's there, that can help you do that more. That wasn't on my list. So I remember taking that jar, putting it into some brown paper to sort of wrap that up, and then I wrapped it in this black cloth that I had, which I'd cut from a maternity shirt that I had worn once because I was starting to get a little bigger, and wrapped that up with the pictures and the things into the jar, tied that up, put it into another paper bag, and put that in the fridge until I could talk to my husband later about when we were gonna bury, because we had picked a burial place where we knew the remains wouldn't be disturbed. So that brings me to number 9, which is if remains are a part of it, remains may not be a part of it for you, it's fine. If remains are a part of it for you, number 9, once you've finished, if you've taken your time, if you've observed, if you choose to do that, it's okay to refrigerate or freeze if you're done observing the remains, until you can bury, if you can't bury right away. So during the weekend that I miscarried, it was pouring rain, and it rained unrelenting rain for days after. And my husband had classes, and I was trying to go back to work. Like, it just wasn't the time right then. So we ended up putting it's in the freezer until we get now a nice day and we can bury the remains. If you pick up a specimen from the doctor after they've tested and they're cleared for you to pick that up, you can also freeze that if you're not ready. Now, that being said, if you're far enough along that you're working with a funeral director, disregard all this and just call them and talk to them and follow their instructions for how to handle that. That brings me to number 10, which is you may still have some symptoms after it's done, which is like physical symptoms. I mean, emotional, there's going to be things you'll be dealing with, but physically, you might still have some stuff. So the day after I miscarried, they sent me for an ultrasound. I felt like everything was done. The cramping had dropped way off. The bleeding had dropped way off. And as I suspected, everything was clear, so they canceled the D&E for me. So I took another day to rest, and I went back to work. That was actually yesterday. But man, I started cramping again. That's a little bit of that like gritty cramp again. I started bleeding again. I was like, what the heck's going on? Not a lot, but it was annoying. And then I realized that a little later in the day that I just had this one like pesky clot that I still had to pass. And once I did, it got a little better. There might still be more. Some women I talked to said they were bleeding and clotting on and off for a little while. So, some had like a crescendo. All of a sudden there was more clots that showed up, and it was like, oh gosh. So you have to keep an eye on that. The doctor says if it's more than a pad or two in an hour, then you need to go to the ER to make sure that there's no retained placental fragments. Your body. If something's off, just go. Like, call a doctor, go to the ER. You want to be very careful in the time afterwards. Also, something is apparently not as common is ridiculous, uncomfortable gas. And this seems to be a D&E or a natural miscarriage thing. But not everybody I know said, oh yeah, I definitely had gas. But there was at least one other that I talked to, and I dug into the internet forums, and they said, yeah, it's really uncomfortable gas for a little while afterwards. So that started yesterday. So I'm doing stretching and, eating light and trying to let that work itself out. It's hormonal stuff. Same kind of things that would happen after you had a baby, maybe, full term, just different, and annoying, but this too shall pass, literally. So those are some things that I learned. I'm still learning about the grief process, which is also personal to everyone. So you need to give yourself the grace to grieve in the way that works for you, whatever's healthy for you. That might be rage crying and Netflix binging. It might be not really talking about it right now because you're not ready. Therapy, though, is really helpful for processing. I'm a fan of prayer. I also do stuff like this where I try to create something, because that helps me to process and feel like I'm actively doing something and making something positive out of it. And by possibly getting the story into somebody else, then that to me feels positive. I had this necklace made. It has the sort of theoretical birthstones of this baby and the one right before it that I had a chemical pregnancy, just with their birthstones and the first initial of the names that we gave them. And it's just a nice little token that I have. It can be helpful to have something like that to, remember this time and honor that life that you carried. If that's something that helps you. I am also probably going to make some kind of craft at some point because we're very crafty around here, and something that I can use to give to my daughter when we do eventually, talk to her about what happened. So I'm wishing you love and comfort as you go through this experience. Just know that better days are ahead for sure. If you have any other questions or anything you want to share, feel free to pop it into the comments below. And hang in there.